What is going on, guys? We're back with more picks and predictions. This weekend, the UFC goes back to the Apex for, a fairly lackluster card when it comes to big names, but some of these fights are looking like they're going to be pretty interesting. A bunch of brawlers on this card, so we're going to see a ton of fun fights. Last week, 7 out of 12 fights ended in underdog wins. We actually went 7 for 12 on picks for the entire card, so pretty decent considering all the unpredictable outcomes. And on premium, we had 5 out of 5 bets hit, 100% hit rate on an extremely unpredictable, extremely volatile card. So we actually had an amazing outcome there, trying to roll it over straight into this week. So without further ado, let me jump right into the picks and predictions for UFC Vegas 108, headlined by Tatsuro, Taira, and Hyun Park. Kicking off the card, we have Bashi versus Yannis. Classic striker versus grappler matchup here. Bashi is going to look to get this fight to the ground. Yannis is going to want to keep this on the feet, and we'll be able to beat Bashi in a pure striking match. But Bashi 13-1, pretty hyped up prospect. Did lose his debut UFC fight to Christian Rodriguez, who is the prospect killer. So he picks up another one by beating Bashi. But I think in this fight, Yannis, with the tape that I have seen, can be taken down. Bashi will look to get him to the ground. And Bashi, only 23 years old, a real learning experience, being undefeated going into his UFC debut, being a massive favorite going up against Christian Rodriguez. And he fought a tough fight. At the end of the day, he did kind of fight for your money in that one. I mean, he didn't just roll over and lay down as things got tough in that matchup. So he is definitely game. I think coming off that loss, coming off that learning experience, he's going to be really powerful in this fight. I do see him getting the takedowns. That being said, though, I think he's minus 700. And for someone still looking for that first career win, and also with Yannis being someone that's saying, hey, I'm working on my takedown defense, I don't know if minus 700 is worth the play there. Me personally, I wouldn't bet on this fight, but Bashi has to be the pick. He is crazy big of a favorite, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight on the card, we have Piera Rodriguez versus Ketlen Souza. And, I went back and forth on this one quite a bit. Did flip the pick in my mind a couple times. And, Piera Rodriguez, I can understand why she is the favorite here. But Ketlen Souza, being gritty, being powerful, being a come-forward striker in the women's strawweight division at, underdog odds against Piera Rodriguez here, it is pretty tempting. And I am going to pick Ketlen Souza here. I think that this is going to be a close one. I do think it goes the distance. I think Ketlen Souza will land more meaningful shots. I think she will do damage throughout this fight. It's the grappling from Piera Rodriguez. The wrestling is what I'm really worried about. Ketlen Souza coming off that loss to Angela Hill. And Angela Hill, kind of a gatekeeper in the division. She's always fought top-level competition. Split decision loss to Angela Hill, where Angela Hill really did mix in the grappling, the wrestling in that fight to kind of beat Ketlen Souza. So I'm worried about that from Piera Rodriguez here. I think that I think she will mix in grappling, mixing wrestling against Ketlen Souza here. But I think on the feet, Souza will land with, much more meaning. She'll land the stronger shots. I think she'll do more damage. And I think that, in the Apex, I think those judges are going to, value Ketlen Souza's performance here just a little bit more. So I think that this is going to come down to a really close decision. If there is a finish in this fight, I think that equity does lie on the Souza side when it comes to her finding a knockout here. I don't think Rodriguez submits her. I don't think Rodriguez knocks her out. So I think Rodriguez can lie on her for a decision here, but I think that Souza will work to get up. I think that she will do damage while it is in space, and I think that she will slightly edge out a pretty controversial decision here. That's how I see the fight playing out. At underdog odds, though, low-level women's strawweight fight, I do like to pick the underdog here, so I'm going to go with Ketlen Souza to get it done. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Felipe Bunes versus Rafael Estevam, and I'm going with Rafael Estevam here. He is a pretty big favorite, but I do think that, there is some cause for concern when you go up against someone like a Felipe Bunes. Felipe Bunes, ultra aggressive, and he really is a finisher, has some real good submissions. And against Rafael Estevam, there's going to be grappling. That, there's going to be openings for Felipe Bunes to be aggressive for submission. So it is something to worry about here. And Bunes, he's been good to me as an underdog. I bet on him in his fight as an underdog against Jose Johnson. Gets that first round armbar. I'm just super not high on Jose Johnson. I think he's a bum. So that's why I kind of faded him in that one and picked Felipe Bunes. But here I'm going to pick Rafael Estevam. Estevam, 13-0, undefeated, coming off 2 solid wins to Charles Johnson and then Jesus Aguilar. You see Estevam, he has really good top control, really controls the first 2 rounds of both those fights. The one thing is he did gas out in the 3rd round in both his last 2 fights and did drop that to both Charles Johnson and Jesus Aguilar. But at that point, it wasn't enough. Estevam, really good fight IQ, knows he wins the first 2. Then he is gassed in the 3rd, but he does what he needs to do to survive that 3rd round, win the fight on the card. So I do like his fight IQ. He's going in there to get the win. Even if it's a little bit boring, he does get it done. And here, I think against Felipe Bunes, he's going to be able to take Felipe Bunes down and control him there. So I see him kind of winning in a very similar fashion, getting a bunch of control time racked up early in this fight, having Felipe Bunes fight from behind. But Bunes is super aggressive. Obviously, with Rafael Estevam taking him down a lot, Bunes is going to be available to, shoot some submissions off his back, throw up a bunch of stuff. And maybe Estevam does get caught, but I don't think so. I think that Estevam, pretty sound grappler, pretty stable grappler, will go position over submission. I think he will stop and thwart any attempts from Bunes. I really like the fight IQ of Estevam. I think that's what makes him, kind of safe to play here. But, Bunes being aggressive, I also think will open up potential submission opportunities for Estevam as well. So I think Estevam could find a submission here. I think he could just ride out a decision as well. Don't see him knocking Bunes out, but I think either submission or decision is the way for Estevam. I'm going to pick him to win. The odds are a little bit wide on this one, and, I think maybe I have a little bit of bias towards Bunes because I bet him as an underdog, so I think he might be slightly more dangerous than he is, but the more I look at it, I think that Estevam is a safe play this weekend. Next up, we got Rodolfo Vieira versus Tresean Gore, and I think this is one of the toughest fights on this card to call. I'm going to go with Rodolfo Vieira, and I think that, the thing with Rodolfo Vieira is that I don't think he's as fast on the feet as Tresean Gore. I definitely don't think he's going to throw as much volume as Tresean Gore on the feet. And Tresean Gore has decent wrestling, so getting Tresean Gore to the ground could be somewhat of a mission for Rodolfo Vieira, which makes it seem like, Tresean Gore is the right pick. But I just think that this is a matchup that Rodolfo Vieira just will win. We know his jiu-jitsu is super legit. We know that, on the ground, he is a wizard. And I think if he gets Tresean Gore to the ground, he's definitely submitting him. I feel like over 3 rounds, Rodolfo Vieira will work his way to get Tresean Gore onto the mat in this fight. I think that the first takedown that he gets, I do see him finding a submission over Gore pretty early once this fight does hit the ground. So I'm going to say that over 3 rounds, Rodolfo Vieira will figure this one out. Normally, I don't like picking submission or bust fighters, and I'm struggling to see Rodolfo Vieira keep up with Gore on the feet. I just think that, Gore, a little bit green as a prospect, 5-3, not the most experienced MMA fighter, and I think that Vieira really excels in the jiu-jitsu category, whereas Gore, I think, is just kind of mid everywhere. So speed and power does go on the Gore side. Striking volume does too, which makes it, kind of scary because Rodolfo Vieira really has to go get this win. It's not just like out there for him. The path to victory is not very linear, but he's going to have to go and make it happen. But I think that over 3 rounds, he's going to be able to do that. And I think that, his grappling advantages in this fight will eventually play out, and I do see him finding the submission. So I'm going with Rodolfo Vieira, but I do think this is a pretty tough fight to call, and I definitely wouldn't bet on Rodolfo Vieira at these odds. Maybe I'd throw in a prop, but so far no bet on this fight. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Rinya Nakamura versus Nathan Fletcher, and I'll be honest right now, I think that I'm a little bit biased in this fight, but I got Nathan Fletcher, and that's maybe because I think Rinya Nakamura is a bum. I didn't bet him in his last fight against Muin Gafurov. I would never bet Rinya Nakamura at like minus 900 or whatever the hell he was in that fight, but Nakamura is one-dimensional, man. He's got some power, but like when you say that, like he's realistically just knocked out a bunch of bums that might have got knocked out either way. Like he hasn't knocked out anyone legit. Obviously, he has that win on Carlos Vieira that he won by decision, which is, not a bad one, but in general, like goes out there, absolutely just trashes his fight against Muin Gafurov, does nothing like he's supposed to. Definitely, I did not take him in that matchup. And now Nathan Fletcher, I just think that Nathan Fletcher, bro, he's more dangerous. He's got some paths to victory. He's a better striker out of the two. If this fight stays on the feet, Fletcher will just tag up Rinya Nakamura. Nakamura, I think like maybe he has like a one big power shot, but like I said, he hasn't knocked out anyone legit anyway. So I don't really trust Nakamura to have like this big power. I think that Nakamura is one-dimensional with the wrestling. And I think in pure jiu-jitsu, pure grappling, I think Nathan Fletcher is better as well. So I see like Fletcher, threatening more in the grappling exchanges. Obviously, Nakamura can control him with the wrestling, and that's probably something he's going to try to do. And Nathan Fletcher on the other side, in that Calvin Loughran fight, he did let himself get held up against the fence for too long. And, that fight was close. It was a split decision loss for Nathan Fletcher, but I personally think he did get robbed. But it was too close to really kind of complain about. Fletcher did have to do more than that. He can't leave it up to the judges, and he can't make it that close if he wants to get it done on the card. So he let Loughran hold him up for a little bit too long on the fence. Obviously, that's some cause for concern against Rinya Nakamura here, who's going to come out here and probably try and control him too. But I think that if Fletcher learned anything from his last fight against Loughran to not leave it that close, I think that he can actually win this one. I think while they're in space, Fletcher's going to score points. I think that in the grappling, Fletcher can get aggressive with his jiu-jitsu, make Nakamura uncomfortable because he's probably the better jiu-jitsu fighter out of the two of these. And then outside of the, just one-dimensional control time that Nakamura has on his side here, which I just don't trust him to go get. At plus 300, I'm taking Nathan Fletcher. So I got Nathan Fletcher here. Maybe I'm just a hater of Rinya Nakamura. That's very possible. So, take that as you will. But I got Nathan Fletcher plus 300. I'm going to sprinkle some money on that myself. Let me know what you guys think about this one, and let's move on to the next matchup. Next up, we got Nick Klein versus Andre Pulyaev, and I'm going with Pulyaev in this one against Nick Klein. I think that, Pulyaev, both these guys had really tough UFC debuts. Nick Klein debuting against Mansour Abdul Malik, Pulyaev debuting against Christian Leroy Duncan. Obviously, both those fighters very experienced and, pretty hyped up. Both these guys were pretty massive underdogs going into these matchups against their UFC debuts. So not really, too crazy that they both are coming off a loss. But Nick Klein, I think that, his BJJ is really good, but he is also fairly one-dimensional. He did rock Mansour Abdul Malik with some spinning elbow in that fight, but I think that's more of a, fluke land than something that you can probably consider Nick Klein landing consistently through fights. Pulyaev on the other side, I think, is a better striker here. He's also 6'4" to Nick Klein's 6'1". I think that's going to make Pulyaev harder to take down. These tall guys, they're kind of tough to take down, especially once they get to the fence. In the UFC Apex, the octagon is smaller too, so it's going to be easier for Pulyaev to get to the fence to kind of defend takedowns. And I think that, Nick Klein is going to struggle to get Pulyaev on the ground here, and Pulyaev can really take over with the striking in this matchup. I don't really trust either of these guys. I think Pulyaev has shown me a little bit more in the tape I have seen. Obviously, Klein had a decent performance in the Contender Series, which kind of gave him a little bit of hype when it comes to his BJJ, but I think he's fairly one-dimensional. I went submission or bust on Rodolfo Vieira, but I'm not going to do that on Nick Klein. I don't see him winning a decision. I don't see him knocking Pulyaev out that, survived 3 rounds with CLD on the feet. So if CLD didn't knock him out, Nick Klein's definitely not knocking him out. I think that from a decision perspective, I don't think Klein has the wrestling to just control Pulyaev. So I see that, Klein really has to submit Pulyaev here if he has a chance, which I don't see him doing. So I'm going to go with Pulyaev to win here. I think he's could potentially knock Nick Klein out. I think he could also win this one on the card. So he's going to be the pick. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Danny Silva versus Kevin Vallejos, man. And if there's any fight that should be minus 700, minus 800, minus 1,000, it's this fight right here. Kevin Vallejos, true blue chip prospect in the UFC. One of the best prospects you'll see right now. He's 15-1, and his one loss is to Jean Silva on the Contender Series. And, we know who the hell Jean Silva is. So Danny Silva, man, he's 10-1, and maybe whatever hype there is on him is making Kevin Vallejos somewhat affordable this week to parlay. I mean, Kevin Vallejos minus 410. Obviously, that's I'm not breaking any crazy news to you guys by picking a minus 410, but I think he should be minus 800. I think he should be minus 1,000, maybe even minus 1,500 because Danny Silva gets hit a lot. Kevin Vallejos has insane hand speed. He has insane accuracy. He has great power, and Danny Silva, he doesn't move his head much. He's a volume striker and doesn't have crazy power coming on his side either. So Danny Silva's not going to have some insane power for Kevin Vallejos. He's going to throw a bunch of shots at him though. Obviously, Vallejos quicker. It's going to land big on Danny Silva. He's going to land often on Danny Silva. He's going to make Danny Silva look stupid out there. The one thing about Danny Silva though is he does have a good chin. So, he might eat a ton of these big shots. I don't think Danny Silva has ever been knocked out in his career. He has one loss, and I think that is by decision. So, Danny Silva probably going to eat some big shots. I still think that he does go down eventually just because of the volume of strikes that Vallejos is going to land on Silva, just because of how much Silva gets hit in his fights. So if Silva comes out here and brawls with Kevin Vallejos, which, that's his normal style, and I think he should probably stick to his normal style. No matter what he does, though, he's got no chance here. Kevin Vallejos, minus 400, I think that's an easy lock. I think super safe to parlay here. Probably the most confident pick on the entire card. Like I said, I know I'm probably not breaking any crazy news to you guys considering he is minus 400, but I think there's still value on that line at minus 400. So that's my pick. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next up, we got Neil Magny versus Elizeu Zaleski, and I'm going to go with Neil Magny here, man. Neil Magny, this is a fight that Neil Magny can actually win, and for once, Neil Magny is the younger fighter in the matchup, 37 years old to Elizeu Zaleski, who's 38 years old. Neil Magny also finally not fighting an insane killer. I mean, yes, Magny's losing a lot, but bro, Gilbert Burns, Shavkat Rakhmonov, Ian Gary, Michael Morales, Carlos Prates, you guys already know this. I don't need to tell you guys this, but Neil Magny gets, the absolute demon after demon. The UFC seems to hate Neil Magny, and I think they're finally, giving him a matchup that he can win. Elizeu Zaleski, I think that, kind of a knockout or bust here. I mean, Neil Magny obviously has taken a shit ton of damage throughout, a ton of fights in his career, coming off 2 pretty devastating knockouts to Michael Morales and then to Carlos Prates. So that is for sure something to watch out for on the Neil Magny side. He is, coming off these 2 big knockouts. But Elizeu Zaleski, it's not Michael Morales. He's not Carlos Prates. Obviously, if Neil Magny's chin is just completely gone, then, Zaleski will eventually touch him over 3 rounds, and that will put Neil Magny down. But I think overall, Neil Magny, 80 inches of reach, 7-inch reach advantage over Elizeu Zaleski here, can tap him with the kicks on the outside, can, get in his own range with the clinch, push Zaleski up against the fence, grind out some minutes there, score some points on the cards just by holding Zaleski up against the fence. And I think that, Neil Magny, he is a gatekeeper of gatekeepers, but this is a matchup that he can win. I think, this is a matchup that he will win. He hasn't won in a little bit. His last win over a year ago against Mike Mallet, who I think Mike Mallet, if I remember correctly, was just like kind of dominating him in that fight. And then just in the end, Neil Magny just took over. So this is a fight that Neil Magny wins, man. I think that, him as an underdog here, outside of, just his chin being completely gone, I think he's a better fighter. He's got the physical attributes too, being a lot ranger as well. So I'm going to go with Neil Magny to win here, probably by decision. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight on the card, we got Karol Rosa versus Nora Cornolle. And I'm going with another underdog here. Give me back-to-back dogs. I got Nora Cornolle beating Karol Rosa. And, Nora Cornolle tends to, do well in fights where the fight stays standing. And I think Karol Rosa, while she does mix in takedowns, she does have the more well-rounded game plan out of the 2 of these girls. She's not a pure wrestler. She's not a pure grappler. She's probably going to mess around on the feet enough, mix in takedowns as needed. And I think that, Nora Cornolle, once she gets going, we see her putting people away in the UFC, coming off that submission win over Haley Cowan. Prior to that, loses a split decision to Cavalcanti. And Cavalcanti, pretty good fighter. Before that, just absolutely destroys Melissa Mullins, knocks her out in the second round, I'm pretty sure. The one thing on the Nora Cornolle side, though, obviously, is the fact that, she hasn't been good on the scale as of late. She struggles to make 135. That's something to note. But in general, I think that, even her missing weight might just be a little bit of an asset here when it comes to the takedown defense, comes to a little bit of the brute strength it needs for her to stay standing. Overall, though, Karol Rosa, I think that she's not the better striker here. She will have to mix in a bunch of takedowns. And I think that, she can mix in takedowns. She can make this fight hard for Cornolle. Karol Rosa, not like a bum or anything whatsoever, but she's coming off that loss to Alien Perez, where Perez was definitely pushing the pace on the wrestling. Rosa wanted that fight on the feet. Now flip the script. Cornolle, she's going to want every fight on the feet, especially this one against Rosa. And like I said, I think Rosa is not going to come out there and just wrestle her right away. I think that she's going to mess around on the feet enough. She's going to mix in takedowns as needed, and I think that that's going to be too late because Cornolle's going to get herself going. She's going to be in flow. She's going to be confident in there. I think she stops enough of the takedowns. Maybe she does get taken down here or there, but I think she stops enough, and I think she does enough to get the win on Karol Rosa here. So I think that Cornolle gets it done. And, probably by decision here. It's hard to pick a finish in this fight, but Cornolle, her fights haven't been going to decision all that many times. So Cornolle is a finisher. She looks for finishes, and I like that about her too. So I'm going with Nora here. Pretty popular underdog this week. Tapology seems to be picking her at over 70%. So popular dog. I get it. I like Cornolle here. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Esteban Ribovics versus Elvis Brenner. And I'm going to go with Esteban here, but I think that this fight could look a lot closer than a lot of people think. I know a lot of people are on Esteban in this fight, but Elvis Brenner, he is a shoot box Diego Lima fighter. And one thing about these fighters that I constantly say, and it's constantly proven, is that while obviously they all have pretty high level jiu-jitsu, they're all ultra aggressive. And, they tend to lose fights when they have the wrestling disadvantage and people are grappling on them. It's happened multiple times with Felipe Dos Santos, with Jose Ochoa. Felipe Dos Santos in his UFC debut was keeping up on the feet, making it close with Manel Kape, who we think is one of the best strikers in the flyweight division. Felipe Dos Santos also, was doing well against Andre Lima, who's looked really good. Andre Lima had to, fully just grapple Felipe Dos Santos. And that's where Felipe Dos Santos just kind of got screwed. Worst takedown defense. He just got sat on by Andre Lima. But Andre Lima, outside of that, has looked great. But he had to wrestle against Felipe Dos Santos. Jose Ochoa, keeping it close with Loner Kavanaugh. Super fast hands until Loner Kavanaugh mixes in some of the grappling. So mixing in takedowns is kind of what messes with these guys, especially when, they are keeping up on the feet, which a lot of them can do. You never really see a shoot box Diego Lima fighter go out there and just absolutely get cooked on the feet. But Elvis Brenner, on the other hand, in this fight, he's going to have the grappling advantage. He's going to be the better grappler here. If anyone's going to shoot here, it's going to be Brenner. And that's what makes this fight dangerous, I think, because these Diego Lima guys are super aggressive. They're super good on both sides of, the grappling and the Muay Thai. I think that with that being in Brenner's back pocket here, which, I don't think was the case in his last fight against Yoel Alvarez, who I think is probably more well-rounded, better than Elvis Brenner just everywhere. I think that, Brenner can start mixing things up and making it kind of tough on Esteban this weekend. I'm still going to go ahead and pick Esteban, but I just think that Brenner can definitely make this fight a lot closer than people might think. Maybe the line is actually pretty accurate, but even minus 285, not sure if it's worth it. And I think Esteban even won his last fight against Nasrat. I think that was a little bit of a robbery, but still, I think that Brenner can make this fight extremely close. We haven't seen that type of fight IQ from Elvis Brenner, and I think that, to be honest, he's going to go out there and just brawl with Esteban, and I think that in that brawl, Esteban probably wins, which is why I'm still going to lean Esteban as my pick. But this is a fight I'd be cautious about. I'd be cautious about having Esteban in every single one of your parlays. Definitely don't be doing that this week. If you are going to parlay him, put him in one or two, but, I wouldn't put him in every single one. I don't think he's one of those pillars of your parlays this week, so take that as you will. But I'm going to go with Esteban, but I think that if Brenner has some real fight IQ, comes in here and, slows the pace down, doesn't brawl with Esteban and, finds his advantages in this fight, they definitely exist and he can definitely exploit them. But outside of that, if he does brawl, which he probably will, I think that in the end of that brawl, Esteban probably catches him. So I'm going to go with Esteban by knockout, but I think that Brenner could make this a lot closer if he wanted to. Next up in the co-main event, we got Chris Duncan versus Mateusz Rebecki, and I'm going with Mateusz Rebecki here, or Rombeski, however you say his name. I've heard it multiple different ways, but I'm going with Mateusz to win this one. He's coming off that absolute gladiator of a win to, Miktabek Orolbai, and if you haven't seen that fight, you should definitely go watch that one, unless you don't like seeing blood, in which case you probably shouldn't watch the UFC in general, but you definitely shouldn't watch that fight. Chris Duncan, though, strung together a couple wins where, people were really doubting him. Balaji Oki, I'm pretty sure he's an underdog there. Gillies him in the first round, and then, Jordan Vucenic, big underdog there. Gillies Jordan Vucenic in the second round. And, people were pretty high on Vucenic, but Vucenic lost to Garam in his, UFC debut. And Garam has looked like trash. And then, Vucenic has also looked like trash. So a couple of bad reads on the UFC community there on those two fighters. But Chris Duncan, coming off those couple of Gilly wins. So he's definitely gaining some steam here. But I think Rebecki is going to put Chris Duncan away. Chris Duncan gets wobbled. Rebecki has big power. Rebecki's also short at 5'7", pretty stocky, one of those builds that, will land a powerful overhand right on, your temple and put you out. That's for Mateusz Rebecki, and that's exactly what he's going to do here. I don't see Chris Duncan, grappling with Rebecki all that. I think that, he's coming off a really good test when it comes to grappling, with Miktabek Orolbai. So he's able to keep up with him. I don't think Duncan's going to have anything for Rebecki here. I think Duncan's really a submission or bust in this scenario. He's got to pull off some sort of sub, but he's not beating Rebecki by decision. Rebecki's also showed an insane amount of heart in that last fight, and, he's not outstriking Rebecki. So I think Rebecki puts him out pretty early here. I see this fight, staying under 1.5 rounds. I got Rebecki by knockout. Definitely a better minus 200 in my opinion than someone like a Esteban Ribovic. So I'm going with Mateusz Rebecki here by knockout. I think he does catch Chris Duncan. I think Duncan, can get wobbled, can get hit, and, Rebecki hits extremely hard. So give me Mateusz Rebecki by knockout. Let's move on to the main event. And in the main event, we got Tatsuro Taira versus Hyun Park. And Tatsuro Taira 16-1, coming off that loss to Brandon Royval. Close fight, split decision. Hyun Park 10-0. Was supposed to be fighting Steve Erceg. Now on short notice, picking it up against Tatsuro Taira. And, I think that Steve Erceg fight was all supposed to be a 3-rounder. Now he's fighting in a 5-rounder on short notice against an opponent that's, just much more experienced than him. This is a pretty big step up in competition for Hyun Park. And that's why I'm going to go with Tatsuro Taira here. I think that Hyun Park, he is, pretty good as a fighter. I think he's going to be like the better striker out of the two of these guys. But Tatsuro Taira really, putting his game plan together here. Went 5 rounds with a Brandon Royval. So he's seen some really dynamic striking in that context, in that 5-round fight. So I think that everything Tatsuro Taira learned over 5 rounds with Brandon Royval, a gritty fight where, he had to fight from behind. He really had to stay in it, stay mentally focused. I think that's a pretty good look for Tatsuro Taira here. Still getting that fight to a split decision loss. And then Hyun Park, I think it's just the short notice, the jump up in competition. I think it's a little bit too much. I'm going to go with Taira here. I haven't played Taira just yet. I think that, minus 360 is a little bit wide. I think that Hyun Park is actually, a really well-rounded fighter in his own right. So it's going to be interesting here. But with the experience and, with the, more preparation time, I'm going to go with Taira to win this one. So give me Tatsuro Taira. And that wraps it up for all the predictions on the UFC Vegas 108 fight card. Thank you guys for tuning in. We've been absolutely killing it with our UFC predictions. I'm also going to start uploading some more UFC commentary style content, so let me know if that's something that you guys want to see. Also, if you do want to support the channel, check out betklpicks.com. For 20 bucks a month, you can see all our bets, our unit sizes, where we're placing them, and even when we're placing them. And you can, kind of tag along with some of the lines we get. Maybe you disagree. You don't have to tag along with all of them, but you do get access to them. So if you do want to help out, definitely check out betklpicks.com. Sign up as a premium member. Does help support the channel a lot. We also went 5 for 5, 100% hit rate on bets last week. So we did really well. So if you tailed, you cashed out big. We had 5 bets that came in super clean on, like I said, a very unpredictable card where 7 out of 12 fights ended up in underdog wins. So even on really unpredictable cards, we're clearly finding the right spots. We're sniping bets left and right. So definitely check out betklpicks.com. And overall, thank you guys for tuning in. If you did like the predictions, hit the like button on the video, share it with one of your friends, drop a comment if you do want to as well. And good luck to everyone on their bets this weekend.